Hello viewers. In the last discussion that we had, in the last kind of an interaction that we had, we tried to look at postmodernism and modernism in a comparative perspective. As I said, postmodernism as a profound cultural change emerged as some kind of a reaction or a response to what some people call as excesses of modernism. To sum it up, we can say, or if I were to use the dichotomical division, or if I were to put it in slightly black and white, though the realities are not like that, but if I were to put it in black and white like that in comparative terms, then I would say that modernism placed importance on science, logic and methods, talked about universalities, whereas postmodernism talked about subjectivity. Modernism was swearing by objectivity, it sweared by postmodernism swears by subjectivity. Modernism talks about universality, postmodernism talks about locality, locatedness. Modernism emphasized on logic and reason, whereas postmodernism is to say was neutral to logic, and that means it did not really reject logic per se, but it was also open and respectful for non-logic. In fact, at times it embraces non-logic more than the logic. On the one hand, modernism wanted to create more and more narrative structures, more and more theories, whereas postmodernism says that single theory, single narrative structure cannot explain the thing. So, let us have plurality, let us have a kaleidoscopic view. Modernism was of course talking about some future project, some future things, is optimistic about future, they want to do something for the future, whereas postmodernism is somehow resigned to the future. Postmodernism also is highly self-indulgent, it places an excessive value on the self, the individual, and postmodernism is not apologetic about sensual pleasures, pleasures which may come out of sex, the pleasures which may come out of our humanly instincts. Postmodernism does not shy away from showing it, exhibiting it. In a way, it deconstructs, it tries to challenge some of the very basic notions of modernism. Whereas modernism preferred rational, reasonable media, print media, it will emphasize more on words and languages, whereas postmodernism emphasizes more on visual, images and what is called as simulation. I am sure many of you have either played or have seen people playing computer games. Computer games take you into a simulated environment, and as you know, the popularity of computer games is increasing by leaps and bounds. There are huge things, as perhaps some of you may be aware of. There are some very important sites and a lot of battle is going on those sites, say for example Second Life and so on and so forth, which have become a major immersive environment for people, where people participate in those games as if the reality, the physical reality around us does not exist. So, simulation is a very interesting development or very interesting point as far as postmodernism is concerned. So, one could see a kind of a I would say progressive rejection of modernism and coming up with new values. Now, when we take these and try and apply it to given situations, say for example television or the different media content around us, then we come across lots of examples. Please remember, I am not giving you a very highly sound and academic oriented example for a simple reason that we need to identify at least some traces of these things in our normal popular environment which we are a part of. In fact, one very interesting thing and important one is that postmodernism places a very high value on popular art, popular culture, whereas modernism is more interested and is more respectful of what is called as high art, or what the French would call as avant-garde art. which is to be found in big paintings and museum, the classical and romantic novels and romantic literature. Modernism really respected that, whereas postmodernism would take pride and would celebrate. Interestingly enough, celebration is also an extremely important value in postmodernism. Postmodernism wants to celebrate everything. I mean, celebration is the very basic notion, because they are all seeking sensual pleasure, pleasure of eating, pleasure of putting on good clothes, pleasure of dancing, all those pleasures which may come out of our five senses. That is what postmodernism would like to celebrate. So, look at this: excessive self-love coupled with celebration, and you have a very fine combination of what is called a celebration culture that we see in abundance around us. In fact, as we are aware, we are increasingly getting into a highly celebration oriented culture. Today, as we put on television, as we read newspapers, or as we listen to radio, and there is some kind of celebration or the other, all those traditional things have been highly getting commodified, and underlying all these changes is the craving for celebrating even the smallest part of it. My point is that let us look at some of the more popular examples of postmodernism. Again, an important disclaimer here, and the disclaimer is that the discussions that we have about modernism and postmodernism, they are highly academic. Many of the practitioners may not be even aware of these terms, and therefore they just happen to be the member of the contemporary culture, and they go on creating the thing. And as I said, we then in retrospect, we then label it as postmodernism. So, I do not decide, okay, I am going to be a postmodernist and I am going to create it in this way. It does not happen that, it does not occur to me in that way. I just do it, and my doing of my creation of content, because I have subscribed to certain values, because the environment around me pushes me to think in a particular way, I happen to create either a modernist or a postmodernist expression. Remember, in India the situation becomes even more complicated, for a simple reason, because India, we are living in a very highly compressed time period, so to say. In the same time, we experience some aspect of our life completely supervised, completely influenced by traditional ideas, some modern, and now for the last couple of decades some postmodern. So, it would be very difficult to say that an average Indian is either traditional or modern or postmodern. We are like, as we are always, we are a mix of all this, we all make a khichdi of all these things, and we live in a way on certain small islands of ideology, but we in ourselves imbibe many of these in varying degrees, and therefore in Indian situation it becomes very complicated, very challenging, and at times almost untrue to label somebody or something as completely modern, traditional or postmodern, and therefore there would always be debates whether we are modern or postmodern, but we are not going into it. My intention is to just draw your attention at some of those reflections of postmodernism, some of the traces of postmodernism in the media environment that surrounds us. That does not of course mean that our entire media environment is postmodern, not at all. It is still in certain way modern, and at certain other way even traditional, but because our topic is postmodernism, let me give you some examples of it. As I said earlier, that MTV can be considered as an interesting symbol, interesting icon of postmodernist expression. The video albums in general is an expression of postmodernist thing. For example, you might have come across video albums which do not have a story structure. The shots are very different, very unconventional. For example, you are looking at me in a very steady state manner, this thing. I am steady, the camera is steady, and the movements are steady. But if you look at the video albums, you would invariably come across that the subject is also moving. Not just that, even the camera is moving, and the moving in a very haphazard manner. It is not like a zoom in and zoom out. It is not even a tilt up and a tilt down. It is like a very jerky movement. Now, this is a very strange thing. I mean, if you look at the traditional textbooks of camera and cinematography or television shooting, then you will not come across references which will encourage this. In fact, they say, oh, this is bad or this is not ideal, but this is exactly what MTV or many video albums have produced, perhaps indicative of the non-linear, the jerky cultural environment around us. So, camera moves in, sometimes the subjects almost peep into the camera, making the images extremely different, almost comic, and you would see this in abundance in video albums. So, also the editing pattern, there is a tremendous non-linearity. You start from this point, go to the next, come back. So, almost a mosaic like structure. Case in point, perhaps some of you might have observed this or might have watched this. There was a very famous video album recently launched by an Indian singer called Rabbi Singh, called Bulla Ki Jana Main Kaun Hoon. Those of you who have seen this might perhaps recall that is a very interesting way of putting it. Very interesting thing. Bulla Ki Jana Main Kaun Hoon is a Sufi composition by a Sufi saint called Bulleh Shah way back. Now, this composition has been taken and it has been used to in a way indicate the kind of fractured identities that we have in this contemporary world. And it has been shot beautifully, and the way it has been composed, the way it has been shot and edited, sometime reminds you of the typical postmodern way of looking at things. Here the singer, the Rabbi Singh, would stand and only the backgrounds would move. Sometime he is there in VT station in Mumbai, sometime you will see him on the mountain top, sometime you see him in the desert, sometime you see him with rural people, sometime you see him in the elite class. I mean, there is no one identity, there is no one background that you can associate it. So, it is a kaleidoscopic way of putting across your expression of identity, and that goes very well with the very ethos of the song Bulla Ki Jana Main Kaun Hoon. It is very difficult, of course, to explain how the whole visual thing has been composed, because you have to really watch it. But nevertheless, one can see that it reminds you of some of the principles of so called as postmodern television. Advertising, and I would emphasize here, advertising has, if you have been following particularly television advertisement, you would realize that of late there are very different kinds of television ads which cannot be accounted for, which cannot be perhaps explained in the traditional advertising sense. I will try and juxtapose two typical advertisements of their own era. I am sure many of you would remember the Lalita Ji ad, right, perhaps which was released in 80s, during the early days of or the heydays of Doordarshan. Those of you who do not remember, I will just give you some small explanation of that, some description of that. Lalita Ji is shown as a typical housewife who has gone out for buying, and she is buying something, and you could see a certain detergent powder in her bag. And then the voiceover comes and Lalita Ji, kya ye mehenga nahi hai, this product. And then Lalita Ji says, bhai sahab, आधा किलो सर्फ किसी भी 1 किलो साधारण पाउडर के बराबर है. Well, forget about which product she is endorsing, forget about what words she is using, look at the argument she puts across, and the argument is very logical. As Lalita Ji, as someone who is endorsing a particular product, she is appealing to your rational senses. And how does she appeal? She says, yes, I understand that this particular product may be a little costly, but half a kg of this costly product would give you almost the same efficiency as 1 kg of a normal other product. So, in a way she is asking you, please think rationally. In a way she is saying, or the assumption is that people buy things out of logic, out of reason. Now, this is an ad in the 80s, and contrast it with the recent ads of certain products. Say for example, I am sure you must have seen this ad of late. This ad is about, I think it is about a chewing gum, or it is about some Mentos. Very humorous, hilarious ad, where there have been 2-3 versions of the ad. In first version, there were 2 youngsters who were shown laying down on a bench near a seashore, and one person is chewing that particular product, and the other guy asks, hey, why are we lying here and chewing this? and then the first person say we are lying here on this bench because the municipality has the corporation has created this bench way back in 1975, and the first person say bad joke, and the second person says but it's a good test, and the punchline is, do you still need a reason? Remember, if you look at the narrative structure of this ad, I am sure you might perhaps recall it, you will say that what is there is nothing. I mean, you see extremely dull joke here, there is no dialogue, there is nothing happening out there, and but it creates a strong sense. And look at the final word, it says, do you still need a reason? A later version of it is even more important. As you might remember, there is a pan shop where a very cool kind of a panwala is making pan. A boy comes, he seems to be very sober, sincere and all that, and he is asking for a pan. The panwala gives him a pan, and instead of giving the chutta, he gives him this Mentos, and then this boy asks, भैया ये हम Mentos क्यों खाते हैं, whatever the product is, I am not too sure, and then the pan wala gets irritated, puts him in the bucket, pulls him out, and he says दोबारा मत पूछना. See, very interesting thing, though it is very hilarious and very creative treatment, the point here is very important. The point is, don't ask questions, don't apply logic. See, remember, questioning ability was a hallmark of modernist era. Modernism wanted you to ask question, don't take things as granted. See, by asking questions you will get things, by questions you are getting into logic, and logic would give you answers. Now this panwala, who is shown to be cool, is saying don't ask questions, therefore he is implying that don't get into logic, human behavior is not logic bound. He says it is just different, and therefore if you look at the ads, or for that matter the very well known Hoodie Baba ad of a particular motorbike. Now the whole ad shows only fast moving bike and only final expression Hoodie Baba. It does not tell you in detail what the bike is about, what the average and what is the engine capacity. It simply is talking about an experience, a subjective experience, so well caught in just one word, Hoodie Baba. So point being that a postmodern form of expression values illogic, in fact at times mocks logic. Case in point is the panwala, that he mocks logic. In fact, you would come across many ads which would mock logic. I will give you an MTV promo which showed very beautifully, very creatively, in a way it was a dig at modernism. As we know, modernism was related to logic. Logic means, I mean, logic is symbolized as a machine, and machine, the hallmark of machine is the will. Will is considered to be an iconic figure, iconic image of modernism. And if you remember, one of the MTV promos show a man encircled in a big wheel, he is running very fast, and the wheel is moving. So imagine, wheel is moving across its axis, the man is running within the wheel, and point is, at the end of it, neither the wheel is moving forward and nor the man is moving forward, because man is feeling that he is running, so he is moving further, actually he is not. In a way, it says that if you are a modernist, you will feel like moving ahead, but the situation around you, the will, the modernism would not let you move ahead. Very interesting comment, and then it comes and says MTV enjoy. Anyway, let us look at this. You know, all these modern, postmodern things would always ask you to enjoy, celebrate, jo chahe ho jaye, Coca-Cola enjoy, right. So the enjoyment aspect, the celebration aspect, the illogic aspect is being highly emphasized in the postmodern expression. Also the sensual, and look at the kind of modern dances that we have. You know, there is a lot of sensuality, there is a lot of glamour, there is a lot of glitz, there is a lot of gloss, all this. Not that it was not present earlier, there it was, but the kind of precedence that it has got, the kind of supremacy, the kind of overwhelmingness that you see it in the modern contemporary television is phenomenal. And this, if one wants to explain, could be traced to the increasing arrival or perhaps a little more acceptance of postmodern's form of expression. Postmodernism also takes a dig at the big things created in modernism. For example, you might come across many paintings which would put Mona Lisa, which will show Mona Lisa with a moustache. You will also come across, for example, on MTV, perhaps you might have come across, there is a program called Fully Faltu. And what does program is all about? The program takes some major iconic films in the past, Bollywood films, Hindi films, and it would ridicule those films. So, for example, remember the dialogue in Diva, Mere Paas Maa Hai, or recall the Gabbar Singh kind of dialogues. They will take it and they will ridicule it. Not just those films, even the latest films also, they will take it and they will ridicule. So, taking a dig, sarcastic, black, this is the nature of postmodernist humor, and you will see it in enough number. You have to get into a different sensibility to understand this. I do not say, as I always maintain, I do not say that people first think about it and then do it. People do it, and in retrospect, when we are seeing these examples at several places, then we say, well, this is something different, and this cannot be explained by our earlier modes of analysis, earlier canons of earlier tools of analysis, and therefore we have to get into a different mindset, and that is postmodernism, right. As I said, and always would maintain that in Indian television, in Indian society, it will be very difficult to make a overwhelming statement, a generalized statement that yes, we are modern or postmodern. But yes, we are increasingly coming across more and more expressions of postmodernism, particularly in certain sections of media and television, particularly preferred in certain by certain types of audiences, maybe the youth audiences in urban locations. They are perhaps little more tuned to, or little better in their position to understand the pun and the fun of postmodernism. For the rest, it will be difficult to understand the joke. In fact, as you might have experienced yourself, some of the jokes and some of the language patterns that you can very well identify and enjoy, your parents even do not understand it. The basic difference is not in there, or that does not mean that the parents are not capable of it. The point is, they are ideologically, culturally do not belong to this perspective, and therefore they cannot enjoy. So, my point is, these are fundamental issues of our imagination, these are fundamental issues of our creativity, these are fundamental issues of our world views which shape our ideas about people, the relations, the society, and therefore we must take them a little more seriously. And therefore, next time you watch television, or next time you read newspaper, or next time you listen to radio and the radio jockeys, please just try and ask certain questions and see whether am I in a particular position to enjoy this. If I am enjoying this, is it because I am a little different? If I am not enjoying it, what is it? And I am sure with this smaller perspective about modernism and postmodernism, we will not be able to enjoy and understand the media text that surround us, but also see the rationale behind them, right. So, this is about a little, I would say, populist, not very highly academic, but a little populist explanation of two profound concepts of modernism and postmodernism. However, I would end up with an appeal that you require a lot of reading, a lot of peeping into or understanding of these concepts, because they are very profound. Please do read, and I am sure you would be in a position to make better sense of the media and the cultural environment around us. Happy television and happy watching. Thank you so much.